Welcome to the people who've tuned in. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Monday. It is April 6th. It's 7 o'clock. I'm sorry for being delayed. I was trying to save my small business. We're here, Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations, and we're bringing this programming to you to talk about civic issues that are affecting our community and the rest of this country. And we're very excited to have you. If you have a question with the inimitable, incredible Rudy Gonzalez, the youngest ever elected executive director of the Labor Council, you can start typing your questions in now. You do not have to wait till we get to Q&A, which will be in 15 minutes. Today's conversation is why strong labor organizing is needed right now. And what better time to have a conversation with Rudy than this very moment where labor rights and unemployment rights are at the top of mind in our country. So Rudy, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. Tell me what the last couple of weeks has been like for you, what you've been doing and what you've been working on, and what it's been like for you as someone that represents labor in this city.
Well, thanks for having me, Manny, and thanks for lifting up this important conversation. The last 2 weeks, like anyone else, I'm sure, have been kind of fast-paced and fluid and uncertain. And right after the shelter-in-place orders came out, we got sobering news from some of our convention and tourism and entertainment unions. They went to massive unemployment on day one.
Right.
So it's been sobering for us also to really, we know about the gap and we feel the gap and we feel the tension around unaffordability. Even for skilled trade workers that have good union jobs, we feel that tension. And then something like this happens and it's like a 2x4 hits you. You see so clearly all the inequality in our society. In all of its forms. And so it's been pretty sobering.
So forgive me for not knowing this, but I thought one of the powers of and the strength of unions is that they can prevent people from being summarily dismissed from work willy-nilly. Is there like exceptions for pandemic unemployment or something? I mean, I thought that's part of the protection of a union is that you don't necessarily, it's harder to get fired from your job.
Well, I guess in the broadest sense, you're right. If you're in a union and you have a union contract, a binding collectively bargained agreement, you don't get fired willy-nilly. And if an employer takes that chance, they'll lose. But what we're seeing is a lot of people who don't have those protections, who don't have a voice at work, they're subject to the whim of a manager or an employer. And in these confusing times, that's a really vulnerable place to be. So in the union setting, we're seeing workers like grocery workers, right? They're organizing their power right now to both protect each other and use their collective strength to bargain changes in their conditions. And knowing that when they do that, they're also protecting the public that they, count on and that they're there to serve. Again, another it's a really stark contrast right now. The haves and the have-nots, even in kind of worker protection, it's really obvious right now, and it's troubling because there's so many people in our city and across the country and the world that are vulnerable right now.
What percentage of the people who work in the city are protected by labor union contracts like that?
There are about 100,000 families in the city that are represented by unions.
Okay.
And in the Bay Area, in California, there's about a little over 2 million that are represented, and about 100,000. And those 100,000 are spread amongst many over 100 unions in the city.
Right. But just because you're in a union doesn't mean that you weren't laid off in this, what do we even call it? This pandemic unemployment crisis. Yikes. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a moment of reckoning. From a class standpoint, right? From the working class standpoint, because this recession will prove to be a great equalizer. So whether or not you were a union stagehand or a non-union stagehand, some of those forces that no union can negotiate away are the economic pressures of a recession or a slowdown.
So let's talk about the $600 per week unemployment benefit that came out of Congress in the Kerrs Act. I was listening to, I don't remember who was being interviewed this morning, but I listened to someone being interviewed about it. And, you know, I don't want to sound too cynical. And I know, and I'm not a cynical person. I'm an optimist. I'm positive. But I was starting to lose faith in the federal government's belief in the social safety net, because just felt like there's so that I grew up in the generation of the, you know, massive economic inequality, and just wondered really, does the federal government care that people are living in poverty? And I have to say, the fact that the federal government came out with basically putting in $2,400 a month in addition to a $1,200 check into the hands of folks who are unemployed right now, it felt like it was a big step. And do you also see it that way? Is it encouraging? And kind of, how do you see us able to build on that if you do see it as an encouraging step?
You know, Manny, I see it as an encouraging step. Although if you kind of go behind the curtain and follow how the legislation arrives at this place, and let me be very clear, we don't believe the Kerrs Act goes far enough.
Yeah.
Let's just say that, right? It's a step in the right direction. It is pretty darn clear that we need a fourth round, if not more rounds of stimulus support for this economy and for working class people. I'll say I'm hopeful because we saw where that legislation started.
Yeah.
And the Senate packaged it. There were no strings attached, and it was a classic corporate bailout. And there was no money for local governments. Think about all the resources that San Francisco is putting in to flatten the curve. And through tough work and through hard negotiations and through some, our own Congresswoman, Nancy Pelosi's leadership, that package of legislation started to shift, and it started to include important strings attached to that corporate money. You're going to bail out an airline. Well, what about the people who push the wheelchair to the gate? What about the security officers that are subcontracted? And what about the airline catering workers, And so we saw important strings attached, but they used a flaw, as hopeful as I want to be. And I'm probably more cynical than you are by nature. And that $600 will do a lot for people, but we can't talk about that without talking about the flawed logic around how you determine who gets a stimulus check. Like the idea that if you're an undocumented worker, many in our unions, you're not going to get a stimulus check, or you are, right? You have work authorization, but your spouse has an individual taxpayer ID number, an ITIN. So they use that like the earned income tax credit formula. And that leaves people out. And we know that leaves people out. So it's good if you're going to get the max unemployment benefit. You get $450 a week. You get this $600. Maybe you're in a union and they were able to negotiate or cover your health care for a couple more months. But for a lot of people, they're going to be totally left out of anything. And
of course, the irony there is that right now, our economy is relying on some of those workers more than ever.
Exactly.
Especially if you look at janitorial staff and farm workers. There was a whole expose about how janitorial staff are being exposed to environments that are really unsafe, and they can't necessarily advocate for themselves. It is interesting. There's been a lot of talk about how right now we are relying on certain hourly wage workers to keep our essential businesses open. And for so long, these same workers have been left behind. And so it's just an interesting kind of focus. I'm asking everyone this question, and I'm particularly interested in you through the lens of labor organizing. What do you think are maybe the long-term ramifications in terms of economic justice of this whole very rapid shutdown of the economy on your work and on labor unions?
Well, I think it calls out some of the issues that we have been either ineffective at moving the masses to appreciate. And in other cases, it re-energizes, I think, a spirit of organizing within our movement that we have seen over time. So on the first point, we were warning about what the gig economy would mean for workers, right? We were talking about it in the abstract about what it means to not have the safety net, what it means to not have SDI, and and I would venture to say that 6 months ago, even more recent, some people might not have really understood what that meant. Where do payroll taxes go to? But right now, the entire economy and around the gig workers, it's exactly what we said was going to happen. They have no safety net, right?
Yeah.
And even with the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is good and we fought for and we believe in, they're still not getting the full benefit. Yeah. And it's even worse now because you have companies like Uber or Lyft who they haven't paid into it. They've completely ignored state Supreme Court decisions. They've completely ignored the law in California. Yeah. And here we are. And then they get to go to the federal government with their hand out and say, we need help for our drivers. They could have had their drivers classified under the law. Their drivers would have had disability insurance. Their drivers could have had the right to organize their collective voice like we see our grocery workers doing. I mean, so those kind of things that we were worried about and we were cautioning about as a movement, those are true, and they're right now. And how we don't ask ourselves why employers aren't required and why we can't get assistance for employers to require coverage for healthcare on day one of employment in this type of a crisis, in a public health crisis, is beyond good. Every Uber Eats driver or Safeway.com delivery, everybody deserves healthcare, especially right now when we're all relying on each other to flatten this curve. So I think we're in a good position to have some really deep conversations and have them as an entire community rather than just as small groups at City Hall or trying to get earned media and things like that. I think people are aware of these safety nets and what they really mean.
Well, that's why I'm so glad that you're on the Economic Recovery Task Force that the city has assembled, because it makes me proud that San Francisco makes sure that there's a seat at the table that is thinking about labor as a voice, which a lot of cities wouldn't necessarily do that, and I'm glad that you're going to be helping lead that effort.
Folks, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of tough work, but I think anytime we can bring in stakeholders in the community, I think that the outcome is always going to be better if there are more voices involved.
So folks, if you have questions for Rudy Gonzalez, the Executive Director of the Labor Council, now is the time to type them in. I just have time I'm going to ask one or two more questions, Rudy, as people type in their questions. Certain industries, right? Because you have over 100 unions that are part of the council or part of the labor market here in San Francisco. What industries have been hit hardest, and which ones might be are the ones that have been spared the worst of the effects of this crisis?
So the first thing I want to say is our frontline nurses, our medical assistants, everybody in the public and private healthcare settings, and our frontline EMS workers and firefighters and first responders. Hats off to them. They're doing their day job right now. They're saving our communities and putting themselves at risk, often without enough PPE, and all the while demanding some of the same things they've been demanding for years now in our city, like full staffing for our public health department. So I want to shout out to all of them first. The hardest hit unions at first are tourism and convention, trade show, event unions. So we're talking about organized labor that serves you your beer and your concessions at a Warriors game. We're talking about theatrical stagehands and skilled workers that make our opera and our symphony run, and work at Moscone Center, for example, people who erect all of the trade show and convention industry, and then the hotel workers that are connected to them, right? So we went from a really robust, booming convention and hospitality sector. The hotel workers union of about 12,000 members, they're at about 90, 95% unemployment right now. And I imagine we'll see more hotels close in the coming weeks. Our stagehand union, Local 510, the sign and display workers, unemployed. And those hardest hit unions, it's starting to expand. I mean, I think we can see construction workers, electricians, plumbers, others, for the first time in a while, starting to see people on the out of work list.
My last question to you, Rudy, gosh, and it's just, I feel like I wish we had more time. This is such a critical topic, but let's just talk about the hotel workers for a second.
Okay.
let's go medium. Let's go to a scenario that's pretty, a tough one to swallow, but we see a couple pretty large hotel closures, that don't reopen. What can we do, or what are we going to do to make sure that those hotel workers get jobs and stay in the San Francisco economy?
So I think the first thing we have to do is remember the last couple of years, these hotels, now we're not talking about Manny's, we're talking about Marriott, right? Global corporations.
Yes.
In our country,
Manny's is definitely not a global
right?
corporation.
So they can weather.
Manny's is a corner store at this point.
But these massive corporations just got the biggest tax breaks ever, right? And so they can afford to keep their workers on their health care for a couple more months during this pandemic. So I think the first thing we do is we don't cede that ground. Workers can stand together and demand that their employers share the profit they already made them and spend down that capital a little bit and keep people with their health care. That's a very real, but we think basic demand and righteous demand. And so I think that's the first thing we have to do is not cede the ground. Now, there are ways that we can help with job retraining. There are ways that we can negotiate. In a unionized setting, you'll have rights to recall. So when businesses do reopen, workers can oftentimes find employment, through their union and their collective bargaining agreement right away. There are industries that are hiring. Can I make a plug?
Yes, please. And this is going to be on YouTube too, so people are going to watch it.
So the Hotel Workers Union and the Retail Clerks Union, like grocery store union, they have a national partnership right now. So they can't meet the demand in the grocery sector right now. And they know that as we experience this pandemic, they're going to need to replenish that workforce to keep that workforce healthy. And so they have a partnership to get a lot of those unemployed hotel workers around the country into those jobs. But that's open to anybody. So if you're listening or you know someone who needs a job, www.ufcwjobs.com. And there's a direct portal where you can put your information in. Someone will follow up with you and text with you, and they'll help you get into a grocery or logistics job. So we
ufcwjobs.com. ufcwjobs.com. All right, Rudy, can we get to some audience questions real quick? We have a couple.
Sure.
Okay, David Williams, can you talk about negotiated paid administrative leave and benefits for those who can't work at this time, public sector and others?
So many of our unions, thanks David for the question. So many of our unions have been negotiating with their employers, be those public agencies, some nonprofits, that if workers are in a vulnerable place based on underlying health, their age, for them to stay home and work remotely if that's possible. On paid administrative leave means you're on full pay and benefits as if you were at the job. We also know that some of our city workers have been displaced because their work site closed. And while many of them are reactivated as disaster service workers and they're out helping, there are others who simply can't go to work because those workers have collective power with their voice. They've been able to negotiate collectively with all the unions and enter into discussions with the city, and they've reached agreement to keep our city workforce on paid status, which I think is not only a benefit and a testament to their power as workers, but it's also really smart planning because that workforce is then accessible and available, and the mayor can activate them as appropriate. So I think it's all around good policy.
Good work. That's good to hear. Alice Rogoff, are there any funds in the Union Plus benefits to help union members who are laid off? Could you explain Union Plus to Manny?
That's a good plug, Alice. Thanks. So we have national agreements with.
That's the secret, Alice. This whole program is just to get.
It's all about a credit card.
Well, no, it's all just to educate Manny. That's the point of all this. Thank you. It's like a.
That's a good question. So union members have the advantage of having their auto loans. Our nationals negotiate deals with auto loaners, insurance companies, life insurance, all these kind of services, credit cards, which means if you're in a financial hardship, you have plans. If you go on strike, they have options to defer those payments. Wells Fargo is one of those, not my favorite banking institutions, but they offer some of that relief to workers. So that's an important program.
Okay. Tony Vargas from UFCW5. Tony represents Macy's associates in the Union Square store who are now on temporary layoff. Excuse me. SF Blair has done a great job by relaying information and resources in connection with SF OEWD. Our concern, Tony writes, is what can we do to bring together the retail stores, big and small, to attract the shoppers San Francisco is famous for bringing in? I guess he means after this is all said and done.
Yeah, no, I think we have to do some things now to start planning for that, because in addition to bringing business to the table and bargaining some of these rights to get back to work when things are better, I think we have to plan to really build the confidence in our community, because after this pandemic phases out and we see a dip in the infection rate, I think we have to be proactive to say the city's open for business, and to say that we want people to come out and support in a safe way, right? In a responsible way. My heart goes out to the sisters and brothers at Macy's. That company has taken advantage for quite a long time. And I think we're going to see other companies use the pandemic as a way to get away from their workforce. Those workers at Macy's are union, and they'll have a right to bargain if we can get that place back open.
Great. I have two more sets of questions for you, Rudy, and then I'm going to let you go. The first is from Bryan Webster. 2 questions from him, so it's a twofer. How are unions communicating now with members and supporters? Are union offices being staffed? And the second is the Labor Council going to be using Zoom-style conferencing for its biweekly meetings?
So the first question, there's a lot of union workers who are essential. Manny, you mentioned the janitors, right? Janitors protesting today. And everything's different, right? So their protest was like in a caravan of cars, and the media, I'm told, that were there to cover them had like the extended boom mics. You know, it's like every facet of a protest is going to look and feel.
Oh my God.
But the councils and our unions are communicating with each other, same way we always have, right? It's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of cell phones, a lot of texts and emails. I have seen some of our affiliates take it kind of to the next level and utilize a lot more technology. But I think it's worth noting a lot of our union halls are open. If you're a plumber or a pipe fitter and you work for the Public Utilities Commission, if the water main breaks or they have to deal with it. So a lot of them are working, and therefore a lot of their union reps and their staff at their union halls are also essential people. So a lot of them are working. We're using Zoom, and we're I think that's the flavor of the month right now in terms of until we get Zoom bombed in one of your interviews, man. And then we'll have to.
Well, that's why we don't have a chat box, because we were getting Zoom bombed. So now now it's just Q&A. So try your worst, Zoom bombers. You can't get me anymore.
Well, I'm going to try that for a delegate meeting then. Just take the chat box off.
You just get rid of chat, and then it's just Q&A. And then you don't put the Zoom link on Facebook, because what's happening is they're crawling through Facebook for Zoom links for public profiles. So you turn it into a bit.ly, like a mini link, and then they can't find it.
So if people are mad because I set up a meeting without chat, I'm going to say Manny told me.
Just send them my way. I can handle it. Last question is from Audrey Garza, and a great question to end on, I think, which is how can workers organize and form unions during shelter in place?
Well, I want to call out a little bit of our history. Thanks for the question, Audrey. We had some of our greatest growth, some of our biggest fights, and some of our biggest achievements. Our fundamental rights to be in unions in America came out of militancy and organizing, and right here in San Francisco. You know, the waterfront strike came out of the Depression, and out of the Depression came this fire and this American spirit that really lifted up everybody. And that was coming off of years of decline. And so when I think about what workers can do now, they can stand together. And maybe we have to do it 6 feet apart or virtually in some ways. But there's no way we can lose when we stick together. And one of the bright spots in this really uncertain time is seeing a lot of working class people, union, non-union, immigrant, citizen alike, coming together, and seeing a lot of our union leaders in the city coming together for the common good. supporting legislation that's going to fill the gap for people who've been left out and really step up to the plate. I'm really proud. Our Labor Council has partnered with the United Way of the Bay Area and their Worker Relief Fund, and we're expanding that into the Alameda Labor Council, Contra Costa County, Napa Solano, San Mateo, to make sure that we prioritize our undocumented families and that we prioritize our hardest hit and most vulnerable union members. So I think we can stick together. That's what gets us through these things, and that's what ultimately builds power. And remember, Audrey, we outnumber the bosses, so it's up to us.
Rudy, thank you so much. Thank you
for doing this. Thank you for
being in this fight. This is a war. That's the analogy that most people are using. And in this war, it is important to have unsung heroes, and you certainly are one. For the folks who've tuned in now, if you go to the answered box, you'll see in the link for answered in the Q&A, there's a link to support Manny's and become a sponsor of Manny's. Manny's is unique in that a lot of our funding comes from a community of individuals. We're actually a community-funded civic space, and we rely on you now more than ever to keep my small business open because we're not making any money. So if you go to joinit.org/o/Manny's, that's joinit.org/o/Manny's, you can become a sponsor of Manny's, or you can make a one-time donation. You can help us continue to do this programming for the public as much as needed. So I do appreciate if anyone that has the ability would consider going to joinit.org/o/Manny's and supporting my small business during this time of need. Rudy Gonzalez, thank you so much for everything that you do. Where can people find you if they need to reach out or if they want to tag you in something? What's the best place to go?
I would say go on our website. You can find me there. You can find our tags to our social media links, sflaborcouncil.org.
sflaborcouncil.org.
Rudy G813 on Twitter. And I want to thank you, Manny, because finding ways to keep us connected, not just talking politics, but keeping us connected as a community, I think are really important. And you and your whole team deserve a lot of credit for that. So thank you.
You've teed me up well, which is I'm going to end this by thanking my team, and thank you, Sam, for being the operator for this call. We appreciate it, Sam, and Jupiter and Ram, thank you for working so hard. My team has been working around the clock to get these programs up and running. So thank you to the team. Thank you to Rudy Gonzalez for being our Joan of Arc and for doing such hard work for everyone out there, and keep fighting the good fight and know that we're here for you if you need anything. Okay, Rudy?
Thanks, Manny.
Thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone, and good night.